morning, Abby, it's Monday, and welcome to part 3 of the series of Unfortunate Etymologies, the show where we look at the names of the characters and sometimes locations from a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket. If you haven't seen the first 2 parts and would like to, there's the thing! Reminders for the following things. Spoilers for everything, including the books that haven't been adapted by Netflix yet. Mispronunciation is a thing that is going to happen, and this entire video series is mainly just me massively overthinking everything. Today we're going to be looking at the names used by various characters while under disguise, as well as the names of the places featured in this series. And, since he's in the thumbnail, let's just start by rushing through all of Olaf's disguises in one go, shall we? Stefano is the Italian form of the name Stephen, which means crown, but it can also mean that which surrounds, and Olaf does a pretty good job of surrounding the Baudelaire's lives with terror and misfortune from every single possible angle. Stefano is also the name of a character from the Shakespeare play The Tempest, which I'm going to proceed to talk about for a surprising amount of time. So, everybody just get comfortable, grab your popcorn, get ready. First off, I noticed that in this play there are characters named Miranda, which is the name of Friday's mother, and Prospero, which is the name of the ship that Olaf was going to use to take the orphans to Peru in the reptile room. But unfortunately, I couldn't tell you what either of them do in the play, because the plot synopses that I read online for this play are so confusing. I think Prospero is Miranda's father, and they live on an island, and then Stefano and some other characters want to take over the island. But then there's also witchcraft involved. What is happening? Back to Stefano, the Shakespeare one. He's pretty much constantly drunk, all the time. For those of you who have read Twelfth Night, the play that keeps randomly popping up in my videos for some reason, he's basically Sir Toby and Andrew fused into one character. It's pretty bad. And in the first book, I remember Olaf being described as drinking pretty frequently, but then that character trait is pretty much completely dropped after the bad beginning, so I don't know if it's still canon or whatever. But then he probably wouldn't have had much time to drink if he's constantly chasing the Baudelaires around. So also, there's a subplot in The Tempest where Stefano gives alcohol to this other character who lives on the island, and as a result, that character believes that Stefano is a god. So I guess that quote that I used to make fun of Olaf in the last episode is technically right. Finally, moving past The Tempest, Sham is a very appropriate name for Olaf's sea captain persona, because a sham is something that is not what it purports to be. So Captain Sham is literally a sham. And believe it or not, when I read the book for the first time, I did not pick up on that. I was just like, Sham. What a weird name. Shirley comes from a surname that means bright clearing in Old English. I kind of wonder if this name isn't supposed to be a reference to Shirley Temple, the actress, considering that Olaf is technically an actor, but I doubt it was intentional. Genghis was obviously supposed to reference Genghis Khan, and the only insight I can draw from this is that Genghis Khan really liked wearing gigantic silly hats, and as Genghis, Olaf wears a gigantic silly turban. Also, since Genghis is a teacher who wears a turban, who is actually evil, I feel obliged to make a reference to Quirrell from Harry Potter. Okay, the reference has been made. We can all move on. Gunter comes from some Germanic elements that mean war and army and/or warrior. Honestly, I just think that when he was writing the book, Snicket foresaw that Neil Patrick Harris was going to end up playing Olaf, and he just wanted to give him another chance to do a stupid accent. Detective Dupin's name comes from the word duping, which, surprise, surprise, is exactly what he's doing to the citizens of the village of Battle Devotees. And also, everywhere else, because tricking people is kind of what he does for a living. And finally, Mattathias is the Hellenized form of a Hebrew name that means gift of Yahweh, which Olaf most certainly is not. Moving over to his girlfriend, the reprehensible Esme Squalor, you may recall that during the 7th book, she disguised herself very briefly as police officer Luciana. Well, surprisingly enough, Luciana is the name of the American Girl doll's Girl of the Year. She's an astronaut. Luciana is the feminine form of the name Lucianus, which comes from the name Lucius, or Lucius, or however in the heck the Harry Potter movies are telling me I'm supposed to pronounce it, which comes from the Latin word for light. In the 9th book, Violet, Klaus, and Sunny go into disguise as Beverly, Elliot, and Chabo, respectively. Beverly means beaver stream, and Elliot comes from the name Elijah, which means my God is Yahweh. But that doesn't matter because I am 100% convinced that these names are supposed to reference Beverly Cleary and T.S. Eliot. Chabo is a little harder to pin down. Whenever you Google the actual word, all you get is a specific breed of Japanese rooster. So my current theory is that it is supposed to be a reference to this offer. But if that's so, then I have been pronouncing Chabo wrong, because it turns out that this offer's name is actually pronounced Shaban. So, Chabo, the wolf baby. I don't like it. It just now occurred to me that the 9th book has been adapted by Netflix, that there probably is an official pronunciation of Chabo out there that would help me with this research. But I don't have Netflix because I'm poor, so sorry. Also in the 9th book, we meet the fortune teller Madame Lulu, whose real name is Olivia. A Lulu is any outstanding or remarkable person or thing, and as a name, it is a diminutive of the name Louise. Louise is, of course, the feminine form of Louis, and Louis is the French form of the Latin form of Ludwig, and Ludwig comes from some, say it with me kids, Germanic elements, meaning famous in war or battle. Maybe because she's the one who first tells us about the war between the two sides of the DFT. I am really reaching for connections at this point, guys. I'm getting desperate. Now that we have been through all of those disguises, we can finally talk about some of the locations featured in this series. We're going to start with the bank that Mr. Poe works at, Mortuary Money Management. Mortuary is a word that means something that punishes via a fine, and I find that infinitely more amusing than it really is, because the bank is pretty much just called "We charge you a fine, money management." The second book explained well enough what the word lousy means, so I'm just going to skip that and jump straight to the third book. Damocles Dock is an interesting one because it's referencing this Roman story called the Sword of Damocles. So basically, this dude, Damocles, he really thinks that his king is cool because he's so, like, he's got all his fortune and power, and so he goes to the king and he's like, "Yo, dude, your life is awesome." And then the king's like, "Okay, you know what? You come back tomorrow and we'll swap places for a day and you can be the king for a day and you can experience all of my fortune firsthand." And then Damocles is just like, "Yes, buddy." So then Damocles comes back the next day. He sits in the king's throne, except the king has arranged for a sword to be dangling above the throne, tied to the ceiling by one singular horsehair. Yikes. The story is meant to show how people in a position of power are always super paranoid about people trying to assassinate them and steal their job or whatever. And I know that it's supposed to reference Josephine being paranoid, and then there's the obvious symbolism about, like, the Baudelaire orphans being happy, but the thread of Olaf is always dangling above them or whatever. But, like, honestly, all it makes me think of is how Josephine's house is dangling above Lake Lachrymose, and somehow just no one is concerned about this. Like, honestly, how has her house not fallen into the lake before now? Speaking of Lake Lachrymose, the word lachrymose means tearful, because of course it does. Why wouldn't it? This is a series of unfortunate events. Nothing can have any sort of happy origin to its name, and if it does, then it's definitely ironic. Moving on to the 4th book and Finite Forest, the word finite just means having a limit. And I can't help but wonder if this is supposed to be a subtle environmental message, because Sir totally seems like the type of person who would just destroy a forest if it profited him. And the forest is finite. So, the word paltry means small or meager, which is a pretty good word to describe the amount of worker safety rules Sir follows. Prufrock Preparatory School is most likely named after the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which was T.S. Eliot's first professionally published poem. Now, this poem is ridiculously complex and abstract, far too much for me to pull any decent insight out of it without actually reading it, and I can't actually read it due to time constraints. But while I was reading about it on the internet, parts of its description seemed just vaguely familiar. You see, the poem is told through the random thoughts of its narrator, who happens to be a sexually frustrated middle-aged man. I find it amusing to no end that the address to the Squaller's penthouse is 667 Dark Avenue. To quote one of my friends, it's close to hell, but not quite. I'm assuming you know why Heimlich Hospital is called such, but on the off chance that you're not aware, the Heimlich maneuver is the name of that thing that you're supposed to do when someone is choking. Believe it or not only is hinterland an actual word, but it can be used to describe a place that is far away from urban areas. A mortmain is when a corporation, back in the day it was mainly religious institutions, has control over a piece of real estate and it's inalienable. No one can ever change anything about it. I don't know why the Mortmain Mountains are called such, I mean, it's not like VFD has inalienable control over the place, because, I mean, their headquarters kind of burned to the ground. But then again, it's probably supposed to be ironic, considering that most things with Lemony Snicket are. One of the main mountains is called Mount Fraught, which is fitting considering that the word fraught can mean filled with or is going to result in something undesirable. The Gorgonian Grotto is named after the Gorgons, creatures from Greek mythology typically portrayed as having snakes for hair and whom you shouldn't look in the eye unless you would like to be turned to stone for the rest of your life. The most famous of the Gorgons, Medusa, is where the deadly Medusoid mycelium virus gets the first half of its name, as Medusoid is a word that describes things that look or act or whatever like Medusa, or, strangely enough, jellyfish? I don't know either. The mycelium is the vegetative part of a fungus, which looks like this. Fun. We're going to finish this video off with the answer to a question that was quite possibly the most burning question for me throughout this entire many question-filled series, and it's one that I think a lot of other people have asked as well. What in the hell is a daily punctilio? It turns out that a punctilio is a very fine detail of conduct or procedure, kind of like how in theater you're always supposed to gesture with your downstage hand. Or is it your upstage hand? Would someone remind me why I think that it's a good idea for me to go into theater again? For a better example, you know how in proper fine dining, there's like specific places where all the silverware has to go to and specific rules that you have to follow so you can look more posh than the person sitting next to you. It's that kind of stuff. Also, apologies to all British people everywhere for that horrible accent. I have nothing against you personally. The Daily Punctilio is well named considering that they tend to focus on tiny irrelevant news stories as opposed to the fact that, oh, I don't know, there's a crazy maniacal arsonist man trying to rob free children of their inheritance. But at the same time, it's kind of ironic because the word's adjective form, punctilious, means to pay great attention to detail. And the Daily Punctilio doesn't do that. While this video is probably going to be a bit shorter than its predecessors, I regret to say that that is all I have today for you lovely people. Next week is hopefully going to be the last episode of the series where we take a look at the etymology of Lemony Snicket's childhood and all the wrong questions. Abby, I'll see you on Friday.